Okay, very good morning. Let us start with today's session. In this session, we will cover few of the procedural parts like amendment to registration, suspension and cancellation of registration, also revocation of cancelled registration, and then question answers. So like that, we will start. So let's start with amendment of the registration. We have already seen the application for registration process and how it is how the registration is granted to any applicant based on the procedure that is being followed. So why do we need amendment to any of the registration which is already taken? Because business in itself is a very dynamic kind of an activity. So for example, I start business at location A, then I grow my business and I feel that there is a need to start my business at location B. So that becomes my additional place of business, stating that it is in the same state. So I need to make those changes in my registration certificate, because earlier I must have given the address pertaining to only A as my place of business, but the department or the authorities need to know that I am also having another place of business of under my registration of GST. So I need to add that place as an additional place of business. Then let's say I am dealing in commodity A, and there is another commodity B, which I see that there is a demand to that commodity, and whenever I sell commodity A, customers are asking for commodity B as well. So I start trading into commodity B also. So initially at the time of registration, while the goods or services tab is there, where I mentioned the five prime commodities in which I deal, I've only added commodity A. So now as I'm also dealing in commodity B, I need to add that commodity to my list of goods and services. Let's say there is a LLP having three partners, and they start the business, get the registration done, and after 6 months, part, fourth partner is coming as an additional partner in the business of that LLP. So accordingly, the change in the constitution means the addition to a partner, that needs to be intimated to the department or government authorities, and that is done through the means of amendment to registration. So in registration tab, we have to go and make those amendments. So all these amendments are basically divided into core and non-core amendments. Certain parts which are essential of business are considered as core, all other things are considered as non-core. For example, I registered my mobile number as a registered mobile number, and then I close that mobile number, I take a new one, so I need to change that number as well. Same is the case with email address, same is the case with any other minute details of the businesses. So there are core as well as non-core fields which I need to change. Fields are the fields which I have filled in at the time of registration, so those are divided into core and non-core, like that. Suppose there is a partnership firm and one of the partner is getting retired, who is already added as a partner at the time of taking registration under GST. So that retirement of the partner needs to be notified to the government, and that is done through amendment of registration. So now you must be clear with the concept of amendment to the existing registration. For amendment of registration, there has to be registration in the first place, which we have seen yesterday how to apply, how the process of registration is done. So procedure of amendment would depend upon whether the details to be amendment in the registration are core fields or non-core fields, as I discussed. So which are the core fields? Core means very essential and connected to the main activity of the business. So that would be name of the business, addition deletion of the stakeholders like partners, directors, etc. Principal place and other than the change in the state. So principal place, if that gets changed in the state, or there is an additional place of business in the same state, all these are core essential characteristics of business, and hence it is considered as core fields. Whereas certain other fields which are non-core fields, basically why there is a distinction between core fields and non-core fields, the procedure for core and non-core fields amendment is different. Non-core is relatively immediate process, and which is done without authorities getting involved into it. So all other fields like mobile and email, etc., so those are some automated processes which are set on GST network or a common portal, following which we get the non-core amendments done immediately. But for core fields, it is similar to amendment, isn't it? So if I add a new place of business or an additional place of business, isn't that I need to have some documents pertaining to that particular place, wherein I can say that I have owned this place, or I have taken this on lease, so I need to produce the documentary evidence for lease agreement or rent agreement or whatever NOC of the owner. So all those core fields need authentication by the authorities. So the procedure to amend the core fields is relatively longer than the non-core fields, wherein similar to the original registration, what we do is we submit the details along with the documentary evidences, and that is verified by the authority, and further after the verification, if the authorities are satisfied, the amendment is effected. So that is how there is a difference between core and non-core fields. So I hope now this concept is clear as to amendment of core fields, what is that, how it is to be made, we will see, and amendment to non-core fields. So there is a basic distinction to it. So let's cover up the non-core fields amendment immediately, because it is a smaller, relatively smaller procedure. So registered person or an UIN holder, if who wants to make an amendment to the non-core fields, amendment is carried out on GST common field and GST registration is amended. For example, I am registered with my mobile A and I want to change that number from A to B, because at the time of registration director's mobile number was given. Now every time I am filing the return or making some changes on GST and filing a refund, doing any activity on GST network or Commerce portal, the OTP, that is one time password, is going to the director's phone number. Director is half of the time out of India, traveling somewhere or busy inside the meeting. So it is very difficult to coordinate with the director and get the things done on the GST network for the compliance purpose. So I decide to give the managing directors or manager's number as a registered mobile number. So the process is very, very simple. Just remove the old number, put the additional number, and the GST registration is amended then and there itself. But for core fields registration, as I told you, that the procedure needs authentication by the authorities. So how is the procedure? Submission of application within 15 days. Why 15 days? Because rules mention so. Whenever there is a change in the core fields, the amendment needs to be carried out within the 15 days of such change. So within 15 days of the change, one has to file that core amendment fields change amendment application on GST common portal with the proper officer, means the jurisdictional proper officer, the jurisdiction with which you are registered, the officer of that jurisdiction with which you are registered will authenticate that particular application. In opinion of PO, whether amendment is unwarranted, means that amendment is done but it was not required, or it is irrelevant, or it is not accurate, or it is inappropriate, he will if it is unwarranted or documents incomplete or incorrect, if that is not the case, means everything is proper, then he will grant the amendment. If that is not that is the case, means the registration was inappropriate or the documents are not sufficient, etc., then he will issue a show cause notice for rejection of the amendment. Means amendment is not acceptable to the jurisdictional officer on account of documents being inappropriate, amendment was not required or unwarranted. Then to that show cause, why show cause notice is served and why no directly rejection of the amendment? Because it is a principle of natural justice that a person needs to be heard, means the right to be heard is to be given to the taxpayer, and that is why the show cause notice is given, and you are required to respond to that show cause notice within 7 working days. Now this is 7 working days, means Saturday Sunday is not included into that, and based on that response, whether the response is satisfactory or not, examples I gave you is the new additional place of business is added, and the lease agreement is enclosed, but the lease agreement is so badly scanned that none of the details are visible on the face of the scanned document. So he will issue a show cause notice and ask you to attach a fresh scanned document, to which you now this time you properly scan it and attach the details, reply is satisfactory, and hence the application is granted. If then also it is not correct or not inappropriate, or the name of the person is somebody else only, then it will be rejected, and again you will have to file another amendment application. So very logical process. Once again, only remember the days. 15 days from the change you have to apply, and for the notice you have to respond within 7 days. Period of 15 working days and period of 7 working days. So any doubt in this?
No, sir.
So let's move on to the next category of procedural portion, that is cancellation of registration. Now, first of all, why a person would go and cancel his own registration? What do you think?
His business is not so good that he is not getting turnover exceeding the prescribed limit.
Unless he is covered by the mandatory registration under section 24, which talks about registration requirement irrespective of the threshold of the turnover, then he can get himself cancelled. I gave you one example that during the integration from earlier tax regime to new tax regime, those who were having the numbers with the registration numbers with VAT or service tax or excise, they were automatically given GST numbers. But the registration limit under the earlier laws were different. Means for service tax 10 lakh was the limit, for Maharashtra VAT 10 lakh was the limit. Now here it is 20 lakhs. So somewhere those taxpayers who were having turnover limit between 10 lakh to 20 lakh, they got themselves cancelled from the registration. So there is a requirement of cancellation because I am not crossing the threshold which is set up in the act. That can be one reason. What is another reason? The business itself is stopped, proprietor is dead, what n number of reasons can be there. So there is a cancellation from the taxpayer side. There is a cancellation from department side as well. Why would you think that department would cancel the registration?
The taxpayer is defrauding something.
Yes, there may be a defrauding activity, or there may be non-payment of taxes, or there may be non-compliance with the laws, for example filing of returns etc. for a specific period of time. We will see all the reasons. Or the registration was obtained with fraudulent intention, means I give some address as place of business, I give another address as additional place of business, the authorities go there, visit there, nothing is there, there is a barren land over there. So all such cases would be covered. So let us see now the circumstances where the registration can be cancelled. So circumstances where registration can be cancelled: voluntarily, or on an application, or can be cancelled by proper officer on his own motion. So there are two things: one is voluntarily, other is on own motion by the proper officer, which is also called a suo motu by the officer. Okay, so business discontinued or transferred fully for any reason including death of the proprietor etc., amalgamated with other legal entities, so that entity itself loses its existence, so they need to cancel the registration. For example, a proprietor changes into a partnership firm, means proprietor span is different, partnership span is different, so both are different legal persons from the eyes of the law, and hence it is two are different persons from the eyes of GST law as well. So like that they lose their identity and a new identities.
Suppose if a proprietor dies and his legal heir takes over the business, then what?
See, we have seen the special cases where there is a transfer of input tax credit. So obviously this registration number gets cancelled. The new registration number in the name of the son or the daughter needs to be acquired, and there is a provision for transfer of ITC etc. that we have seen in the section 18 input tax credit. So the registration is different. There the registration needs to be cancelled. Correct. Then taxable person other than voluntarily registered person who is no longer liable to register under section 22-24. Means what do they say? They say that if the registration was given to you, or the registration was acquired by you on account of you crossing the threshold limit, then you are no longer liable to get registered because of the threshold, then you can cancel the registration. But if the registration was not applicable to you and you have voluntarily taken the registration and you are cancelling the registration, then that is not covered here. Okay, earlier I think that period was only 1 year. For 1 year you cannot cancel, but now I think that they have covered into the entire clause itself. Circumstances where proper officer can cancel the registration. Now these were the assessee side, these are now the proper officer side. A registered person has contravened the prescribed provisions. Which are the provisions? If those are contravened or not followed or not fulfilled, then the officer can initiate the cancellation of registration. He does not conduct any business from the declared place of business. How would the officer know? Simple. He will see last 6 returns. If zero turnover is mentioned in all 3 Bs, sometimes what happens, this is, I mean, out of the law perspective, practical scenario I will give you. Many times people don't have cash flows to pay off because their credit period to their customer is, let's say, 60 days, 90 days, and they have to pay the tax within 20 days of the next month, means at the max 30 days. So that working capital cycle sometimes is misfit, and because of that people are not able to pay the taxes. So what they do, they simply show zero turnover in the 3B, and whenever they have cash they will pay in the next month with the interest. Once you pay with the interest means that you have corrected your misconduct. So what happens, officer observes that for last 6 months of this assessee is filing zero turnover returns, nil return 3Bs, means he considers that he has not conducted any business from the declared place of business, or he visits the place of business after the nil returns. He just wants to make sure that there is no business which is carried on, so he visits the place of business and see that there is nothing of that sort which he has mentioned in the registration certificate. Then it is confirmed for him that there is no business activity, right? So for example, in one of the departmental audit cases of one of the cases which were referred by one of the chartered accountants to me, so it was his client and the authorities started conducting the audit. So during the audit, under section I think 65, that is departmental audit, not the GSTR 9 and 9C which is chartered accountants audit. So department wanted to visit the place. So just before the one day, the officer calls me and says, the taxpayer calls me and says, sir, tomorrow these people are going to come, the authorities are going to come. I told him, yes, I know that, because I will be accompanying them, and I will monitor the visit so that nothing wrong is done, or nothing, no wrong particulars are mentioned by you or your accountant, etc. So he says there is one problem. So I asked him what is the problem. So he says that I conduct a business from a place which is already registered as a different registration number place for different commodities by my brother also. So such kind of things can happen. So then we had to do certain things and activities which correlated that he was also registered in the same place, and he was also carrying out the activities with the help of certain registers, those were mentioned and maintained at that places, and certain stock which was kept at that places. So we could establish that fact, and we could demonstrate that the activities were carried out by this assessee also. But such problems may occur practically. So authorities, when visit, they find out that there is no place of business, so they confirm that no conduct of business from the declared place of business. Now, issue of invoice or bill without supply of goods or services in violation of the provision of law. This is called as circular trading. This is a very common offense, and nowadays there is a special branch of GST which is called a DGGI, Director General of GST Intelligence. So this is a very smart department of GST, and what they do is they run excellent sort of analysis from the available data, and they have got equipped with a lot of things which give them good reports. Based on those reports, they find out that whether there was actual activities which were performed, or this is just coloring of documents, means all the papers are issued and no activities are carried out. If you see section 122 under CGST Act, it is dealing with the offenses under GST Act. So it is called as prime offense to issue tax invoice or issue bill without actual supply of goods and services. Means that you are doing some fraudulent activity with an intention to defraud the government. There can be vice versa case also, means actually supplying of goods and services without issuance of bills. That is also offense under section 122, and such offense is liable to be penalized with rupees 10,000 penalty for each such invoice or each such case. So that is a big sort of an evasion of tax and offense. But if the authorities find out that such things are happening, means a person is issuing tax invoices and not actually supplying the goods, then in that case they may cancel the register. So this is one of the contravention of the provision which is considered of reason for officer suo motu cancellation of the activity, the registration. Violates the provisions of section 171. There is a concept called as anti-profiteering activity, which is not there for CA inter exam, but shortly I will explain you. The law says that when you are transferred from non-GST regime to GST regime, you should not make the costing of your products and commodities in such a manner that it is profiting you. Means that profit for transferring from old regime to new regime should be transferred to the customer through a price reduction. And a lot of cases, if you read the newspaper, there were a lot of cases of anti-profiteering which were initiated. Started with Maruti Suzuki. So they had to reduce the prices of their vehicles because they were getting some certain benefits of the change in the taxation regime. So if there is a violation of anti-profiteering, then it may be considered as one of the reasons. Violates rule 10A, furnishing of the bank details. So bank details are not furnished after registration, they need to update, that is not done. Avails input tax credit in violation of the provision of section 16 of the act or rules made. This is very very serious now. See, there are conditions which we have seen which are covered by sections 16, 16(2), which includes you should physically receive the, you should receive the invoice or tax invoice or debit note or any tax document. Then you should physically receive the goods or services. Then the tax needs to be paid to the government treasury, and you should file the return. Any of these conditions is not satisfied. From 1st January they are introducing section 2AA also, which means 100% matching. Means the particulars of the input tax credit that you are taking are mandatorily to be furnished by your supplier in his GSTR1. So that is another condition which is added now from 1st January 2022, coming January. So that is also another condition. So all those conditions needs to be satisfied. If any of the conditions is not satisfied, officer can take an extreme step and cancel the registration. But we have seen that courts are doing a pretty fantastic job as far as interpretation of this section is concerned, because this is a very harsh provision and this gives plenty of rights to the officer to cancel the registration. But authorities say, and the courts say that if you want the tax revenue to be generated, cancellation is not the solution. Give them another chance to comply with the provision. Start recovery proceedings if you feel that it is appropriate, but cancellation is not the criteria. I remember one case, some Padmanabhan or something, Madras High Court case, a very very interesting case. The authority at that was a revocation of cancellation case. So revocation, there was a cancellation of registration. So the assessee applied for revocation of cancellation. Means revocation means cancel the cancellation and give me back my registration number so that I want to do my business. So authorities cancelled because of any of the reasons. Okay, so that cancellation needs to be made good by revocation of cancellation. So once revocation is done, your number is active again. So one application was given for revocation of cancellation, and the authorities started verifying the input tax credit, whether it is appropriate, whether there is a matching, etc. at the time of revocation of cancellation. So the High Court, Madras High Court, said that assessing the input tax credit at this time is very very inappropriate. First you grant him the registration, then you issue him the notice for checking of the ITC or checking of his claim of appropriateness of the ITC, and you assess that case, adjudicate that case separately, but don't mix up those things into registration, cancellation, revocation. So revocation is a entirely separate process and needs to be assessed very appropriately. We will see that revocation as well. Furnishes the details of outward supply in GSTR1 for one or more tax periods which is in excess of the outward supplies declared by him. Means against mismatching of the details of his own. Violates the provision of rule 86B that we have seen in ITC utilization, how the percentage 1%, 99%, etc. A registered person has not filed returns for continuous 6 months or 3 consecutive tax periods in case of a person of composition, means 3 quarters or 6 months, whichever is applicable to you, normal taxable person. Means 6 months I don't file, they will cancel the registration. Then you'll have to file the returns up to the date of cancellation and then revoke the application. I may apply for revocation. Registration was obtained by means of fraud or willful misstatement. So certain details provided at the time of registration itself are not correct, fraudulent, or there was intentive misstatement or suppression of the facts, then the registration may be cancelled. Voluntarily registered person has not commenced the business within 6 months from the date of registration. So I apply for voluntary registration assuming that I will be supplying to a limited company or a listed entity, and listed entity has a set of rules saying that that particular listed entity has a set of rules saying that I will only procure from registered GST person. Then I get myself registered even if I am not crossing my turnover, but 6 months I do not receive an order from that company, my business is not started. This case is covered under here. So all these cases, the registration will, the authorities get a right or a reason to cancel your registration, which is called a suo motu cancellation by proper officer. Procedure for cancellation when applied by a registered person. So now this is first part wherein the application is made by the person who has the registration to cancel, means that threshold is not crossing, or earlier it was crossing but now it is not crossing, business is stopped, whatever is the reason. So application needs to be done within 30 days. A registered person seeking cancellation of registration shall electronically submit the application for cancellation of registration in prescribed form within 30 days of occurrence of the event warranting cancellation. So my limit is not crossing, I observe it and I apply within 30 days of such observation. Furnish required details. He is required to furnish the following details. Which are these details? Inputs held in stock or inputs contained in semi-finished finished goods held in stock or capital goods held in stock on the date from which cancellation of registration is sought. We have seen why, because those debits to the electronic credit ledger etc needs to be done, that credit needs to be cancelled etc. Then liability thereon, what is the liability that needs to be paid off because he has already availed the input tax credit of all those stocks. Details of the payment if any made against such liability, so challan details, and may furnish relevant documents if required. Then after assessing, the proper officer shall issue the order of cancellation. I remember they used to take 1.5 years to cancel, pass the order. Means we had applied in 2017-18 and somewhere in 2019 we got order of cancellation. Earlier that was the time which was taken by the authorities to process the cancellation because they were burdened with the VAT work or earlier service tax work and they did not know the procedure to pass the order for cancellation of registration. Now they have become a little bit proactive. They see that yes, application is being made, documents are submitted, they will pass the cancellation order. But after the order is passed, within certain period of time you have to furnish GST 10, which is the final return, last return that you need to file. So registration within 30 days from the submission of application. Procedure for cancellation, where the proper officer has a reason to believe that, now this is suo motu by the officer, where the proper officer has a reason to believe that registration of a liable person to be cancelled, he may, without affording such person a reasonable opportunity of being heard, suspend the registration of such person with effect from a date to be determined by him till the completion of the proceedings of cancellation of registration. So for suspension there is no requirement of right opportunity of being heard, so he can suspend the registration. That is not a final cancellation, this is just an intermediary step where a comparison of GSTR 3B returns furnished by a registered person with the details of outward supply furnished by GSTR 1 or the details of 2A 2B inward supplies derived based on the details of outward supply furnished by the supplier in their form GSTR 1 or such other analysis as may be carried out on the recommendation of counsel show that there are significant differences or anomalies indicating contravention of the provision of the act or the rules made thereunder, his registration shall be suspended and the said person shall be intimated in form Reg 31 electronically on the common portal or by sending a communication on his email address highlighting the said differences and the anomalies and asking him to explain why within 30 days as to why his registration shall not be cancelled. So it is like memo given by the authorities and 30 days time to explain. Means any of these reasons are happening. Based on these reasons, officer will suspend the registration and he will send an email communication to the registered email address of the taxpayer along with updation of such activity on the GST common portal saying that the registration is suspended and reason why it should not be cancelled within 30 days.
So, what is the meaning of this anomaly?
Anomalies means for example confusions or inaccuracies or something like that. A law can be interpreted in X manner or Y manner also, so there is an anomaly in the drafting, something creating a confusion or non-clarity or disturbance, creating disturbance, something like that. Effective date of cancellation. The cancellation of registration shall be effective from the date determined by the proper officer and mentioned in the cancellation order. So he may say that yes, registration is cancelled but with effect from such and such date. Okay. He will direct the taxable person to pay arrears of tax, interest, penalty including the amount liable to be paid under section 29(5). Amount payable on cancellation. What are the amount which is payable on cancellation? In respect of inputs, ITC on stock of inputs computed proportionately on the basis of corresponding invoices on which credit has been availed. Output tax payable on such goods, whichever is higher. So you have a stock and pertaining to that stock there are 20 invoices. So proportionate input tax credit will be calculated, or output tax payable on such goods whichever is higher is to be considered as payable tax. In respect of capital goods, ITC involved in the remaining useful life. We have seen the total useful life is of 5 years. So remaining useful life in months on the capital goods computed pro rata basis, taking useful life as 5 years. Tax on the transaction value of such capital goods or plant and machinery whichever is higher. So that needs to be paid on the cancellation of registration. Now suspension of registration. Before cancellation, during pendency of cancellation procedure, registration may stand suspended. So this is intermediary process. In this way, a taxpayer is freed from the routine compliances including filing returns under GST law during the pendency of the proceedings related to cancellation. So earlier there was a confusion. A person used to apply for tax cancellation. Means if Mr. X is there and he thinks that in the year 21-22 my tax threshold, my turnover threshold is not exceeding the 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs limit, so I need to apply for cancellation. So on 1st April 22 he applies for cancellation. So on this date particularly he is still conducting his business, the business is not stopped. So from 2nd April 22 till this application is processed, let's say 30 days are given, so 30th April this application is processed. So from 2nd April to 29th April, is it not that he is supplying goods? So supply is happening. So his question is that should he issue a tax invoice? Should he recover the tax? Should he collect the tax and pay it to the government? Whether the customer will get valid input tax credit, because on 30th April 22 if the order is passed by proper officer saying that it is effective from 1st April 22, that is application of cancellation of registration, then what happens to the supply which is done from for this period? Earlier there was no answer to this question and we have practically faced such kind of situation, but later on the provisions of suspension of registration were introduced and this now give a clarity. They say that during a taxpayer is freed from the routine compliances including filing returns under GST law during the pendency of the proceedings related to cancellation of registration. So he need not do all those things. If the cancellation is not accepted or rejected, in that case then the tax will be recovered by the authorities. So effective date of suspension, where registered person has applied for cancellation, the registration shall be deemed to be suspended from the date of submission of the application, that is 1st April, or the date from which the cancellation is sought. Means in the application he mentioned that should be cancelled from 1st March 22. Then from that date, whichever is later, which is then April, because he is making application on 1st April. And where cancellation initiated by department, proper officer may suspend the registration of such person with effect from a date to be determined by him. So he will determine from which period till which period the returns are not filed, then they will assess and allot a date that from this date the registration should be suspended. During suspension, no taxable supply can be made. Such person shall not make any taxable supply during the period of suspension and shall not require to file any return. The expression shall not make taxable supply shall mean that the registered person shall not issue a tax invoice. Means he cannot collect the tax on that registration number. He will continue his business. Accordingly, no tax charge on supplies made by him during the he is not restricted from making business or making supplies, but he is only restricted from collecting tax on that. So he cannot issue a tax invoice. We were dealing with one of the case wherein one of our client was issued invoices worth rupees 25 lakhs after when the registration was suspended. So that tax was, and the case was into litigation, and the authority started demanding that particular liability from him, and he said that it was not paid by the customer, so we did not pay. That stand which was taken, which is a completely wrong stand. Then we responded saying that his registration was suspended. How he issued the invoices to us, those invoices itself are not valid, and hence we cannot either accept the invoices or pay the tax on the invoices. Yes, we agree to the liability of the basic amount, which were the services which were performed by him for us, and we are ready to pay him those services, but we are also facing the cash crunch. But tax in any way we are not liable to pay or make good to him. So that was the stand which was taken, which was accepted at the litigation level. The expression we have covered this. In respect of supplies made during the such period, provision of revised tax invoices and provision of first return shall apply. So that is same to the application area. Then the revocation of cancellation. So restoration means my registration is cancelled, but I want to do business. I want to make good the situation. I was having working capital crunch, cash flow crunch, stress on working capital. Now my business orders have started. Now I can pay off the liability with interest. So I want my registration back. So I apply for revocation of cancellation. What is the procedure? In case where registration is cancelled suo motu by the officer, the taxpayer can apply within 30 days of the service of cancellation of order, requesting the officer for revoking the cancellation. However, before applying so, the person has to make good the default by filing all the pending returns, making payment of all the dues. Rather, whenever the application is made, a hearing is given to him. During that hearing, the officer checks whether those returns which were pending for 6 months, 6 months is the period which is given. For 6 months, if it is not filed, then he can cancel the registration. So for example, after 6 months, let's say after 2 months, the registration is cancelled with effect from earlier date. So what we have to do for revocation or restoration, I have to file 6 plus 2 months. Till the date of cancellation, I have to file all the returns. Now, if satisfied, the proper officer will revoke the cancellation earlier order by him. However, if the officer concludes to reject the request, then first observe the principle of natural justice, means he will give a hearing, opportunity of being heard, by way of issuing a notice to the person and hearing him on the issue. Time limit for return filing on revocation of cancellation. As we have already seen that the common portal does not allow furnishing of returns after the effective date of cancellation, but returns for the earlier period. Means, okay, first we will cover this and then I will explain with the example. For the period before the date of cancellation mentioned in the cancellation order can be furnished after cancellation, where the registration has been cancelled with effect from the date of order of cancellation of registration, the date from which returns are not furnished, the date of order of cancellation and date of order of cancellation. So effective date is date of order of cancellation. Returns to be filed before applying for revocation is till the date of order of cancellation, and the returns to be filed within 30 days of revocation, means two periods are divided basically. So date of order of cancellation and period of for which you have not filed the return, that is the earlier period, and from the date of cancellation of order till the current date, those periods are different. So what you are supposed to do at the time of making application for revocation, you have to cover the first area first. So all the 6 pending returns up to the date of cancellation order you have to file, and if you read the order, they will pass the order as you have completed. If you read the order, that order is always subjective. What it mentions, the cancellation revocation is subject to the fact that within 30 days all the returns up to the date of application of cancellation of revocation of cancellation are made good by the assessee from the date of this order. So there are two periods which one has to remember practically. Extension of time limit. Now what happened is that COVID was a tricky period. People did not have money to file GSTR 3B, and GSTR 3B cannot be filed for payable liability, means with payable liability it cannot be filed. So a lot of people missed out on filing GSTR 3B. They just kept on filing GSTR 1, etc. So their registrations were cancelled by the officer, and the people, as they did not have money to again, because basic condition is to again make good the default, so they did not have the amount to pay the GST liability, and hence the revocation was not done in the period which was allotted. So government, on its own motion or on the based on representations given by many of the associations, came up with a extension or Abhay Yojana. So what did it say? Extension of time limit for filing application of revocation of cancellation of registration by a registered person permitting beyond the stipulated time. So this was given on 18th May 2021. A registered person whose registration is cancelled by the officer on his own motion, that is suo motu cancellation, may submit an application for revocation of cancellation of registration in prescribed form to such officer within 30 days from the date of the service of order of cancellation registration, or within such time period as extended by the additional commissioner or joint commissioner or the commissioner, as the case may be, in exercise of the powers provided under proviso to section 30 subsection 1 at the common portal, either directly through or facilitation center. This is applicable with effect from 1st January 2021. So only period from 1st January 2021 was covered, which was a major issue period, and permitted the extension of time limit for filing application of revocation. So basically there was an extension which was provided in this case. So the time period for filing application of revocation was 30 days from the date of service of order of cancellation, on sufficient cause being shown. Means you have to demonstrate that there were issues, working capital problems, loans were not repaid, etc. and reasons to be recorded in writing by additional commissioner, 30 not period not more than 30 days, or by the commissioner a further period of not means 90 days. 30 plus 30 plus 30. With this we conclude the topic of registration. So should we start with the question answer session?
Yes.
What's the time? It's at least a couple of today's and tomorrow session I will just start today, at least cover 5-6 questions. Let's see. Simple questions will quickly run through, and important questions will see in detail. ICA module, first question: determine the effective date of registration in following case. This is very important and favorite area of paper setters. Effective date of registration. We have seen two categories of effective date of registration. So determine the effective date of registration in following cases: the aggregate turnover of Dhampur Footwear Industries of Delhi has exceeded the applicable threshold limit of rupees 40 lakhs. 40 lakhs means he is exclusively
in trading of
goods. On 1st September, it submits that application for registration on 20th September. A registration certificate is granted on 25th September. Every supplier becomes liable for, okay, let's read second question and then let's try to answer. Mehta Teleservices is an architect in Lucknow. His aggregate turnover exceeds 20 lakhs on 25th October. It submits the application for registration on 27th November. Registration certificate is granted on 5th December. So let's see how the answer is different in both the cases. What is the period which is within which you have to apply for registration?
30 days from person becoming liable, and on the day which he becomes liable, if he files within time limit, his registration will be applicable from that date. Otherwise, if he fails to file that within 30 days, then date of grant of application certificate is
correct. Absolutely correct answer. So case A, how do we write this? Effective date of registration: every supplier becomes liable for registration if his turnover exceeds the applicable threshold limit, 40 lakhs in this case, in a financial year. Section 22 read with notification 10/19 7/3/19. You can mention the notification or you can skip also. If you remember section 22, that is well and good. Since in the given case the turnover of Dhampur exceeded 40 lakhs on 1st September, it becomes liable to registration on the said date. Further, since the application of registration has been submitted within 30 days from such date, the registration shall be effective from the date on which the person becomes liable for registration. So important aspects are within 30 days from the date from which person is liable to become liable to registration. Therefore, date of registration is with effective date of registration is 1st September. In given case, the turnover of Mehta Teleservices exceeds the application threshold limit of 20 lakhs on 25th October, it becomes liable to registration on the said date. Further, since the application of registration has been submitted after 30 days from the date of liable to registration, the registration shall be granted from the date of grant of registration. So it is 5th December. So you need to distinguish between both the cases appropriately, stating that whether the application was filed in the due time of 30 days period or not. In order to be eligible for grant of registration, a person must have a PAN account number issued to Income Tax Act 1961. State one exception to it. NRTP. A permanent account number is mandatory to be eligible for grant of registration. One exception to this is non-resident taxable person, that is NRTP. A non-resident taxable person may be granted registration on the basis of other prescribed document instead of PAN. He has to submit self-attested copy of a valid passport along with actually there are two things, either passport or the income tax details of the respective country, but here I think we forget to okay, it is given. Application signed by authority who is an Indian resident having PAN application will be submitted. No, we have covered only one, so that is also approved document for NRTP. State which of the following suppliers are liable for to be registered. A. Agent supplying goods on behalf of some other taxable person and its aggregate turnover does not exceed the applicable threshold limit during the financial year. An agriculturist who is only engaged in supply of produce out of cultivation of land and its aggregate turnover does not exceed the applicable threshold limit during the financial year. How do you write the answer?
Both are not. Firstly, the agent who is supplying goods on behalf of a taxable person, he's not liable because he is dealing on behalf of the registered person. So he will directly not pay the tax, and instead the principal will pay the tax.
That is okay. Registration and tax payment are two different things. So section 24, do you remember? Mandatory registration without crossing of threshold. So let's see. Section 22 stipulates that every supplier becomes liable to registration if his turnover exceeds the applicable threshold limit in a financial year. However, as per section 24, a person supplying goods or services on both on behalf of other taxable person, whether as an agent or not, is liable to be compulsorily registered even if aggregate turnover does not exceed the applicable threshold limit during the financial year.
But sir, then although he is turnover, he has to comply with that GST.
Yes, compliance he will have to do. In that he will say which invoices were generated by him, which invoices are generated on principal name, etc. But for registration purpose, he has to get registered because he is supplying goods or services on behalf of somebody else, and whether as an agent or whatever by whatever name called. So it is covered by mandatory registration under section 24. Similar to that, interstate supply through e-commerce operator. Do you remember all those things? So those are covered by section 24. And B, agriculturist is section 23. So 22, 23, 24. 22 threshold, 23 not at all required to register, and 24 mandatorily registered from rupee 1. 23 agriculture is also, there are certain conditions. Own cultivation or cultivation of through family or supervised by him with family. Yes. So he is not required to get registered. What are the advantages of taking GST registration? What do you think? What are the advantages?
He will get ITC.
Correct.
There will be transparency in business.
Okay. So legally recognized as a supplier for goods and services. Proper accounting of taxes paid on inputs, goods or services which can be utilized for payment of GST. One point, if you can write, we have explained this value addition taxation model. What happens if any of the person in the chain is not registered? What he will do? Whatever taxes he has paid, it becomes cost of his. So he will add it to his cost, and he will add to that extent he will overprice his commodity. So his ultimate price of the goods or services is increased because he is not registered. Means the entire chain is disturbed. But writing that is a little bit critical. So you can practice one para if you can write on this, and you can write this in the exam if the question comes. So that is a very very crucial point which I think many of the people will miss out, that ultimately he will be a reason, or he will lead to increase in the price of goods and commodities, because he will not be in a position to transfer or carry forward the input tax credit benefit in the chain of value addition taxation. That is how you have to write it. Clear? Legally authorized to collect tax from his purchases and pass on the credit of taxes of the goods and services, becomes eligible to avail various other benefits and privileges rendered on GST law. Can a person without GST registration collect GST and claim ITC?
No.
Correct. If a person is making taxable supplies from different states with the same PAN, can he operate with a single registration?
No. For every, if he is operating in more than one state, he has to operate separate registration for both states.
Correct. Can a person having multiple places of business in a state obtain separate registration for each in the same state?
Yes.
Then the answer is yes. He can have multiple registration for a single state, same registration for additional places of business, or different registration as if he chooses to opt for such. Is there a provision for a person to get himself voluntarily registered through him, though he may not be liable to pay GST?
Yes.
Yes, he can voluntarily apply under section 25. Can a department through the proper officers suo motu proceed to register a person under GST?
Yes.
Yes, we have seen many cases of search etc. wherein the officer will grant him a registration number, ask him to pay taxes, and then operate. In terms of section 25(8), where a person is liable to be registered under GST law fails to obtain registration, the proper officer may, without a prejudice to any action which may be taken under GST Act under any law, proceed for registering that person under rules. Whether registration is granted to any person is permanent.
Yes.
Unless it is cancelled. Means it is something like you are alive until you are dead. Correct? Is it necessary for UN bodies to get registered at GST?
No.
In terms of 25(9) of the CGST, all notified UN bodies, consulate, embassy of foreign countries and any other class of persons so notified would be required to obtain a UIN from the GST portal. The structure of the said ID would be uniform across the states in conformity with GSTI structure, and the same will be common for central and state. The UIN will be needed for claiming refund of taxes on notified supplies of goods and services. What is the responsibility of the taxable person making supplies to UN bodies? Responsibility of the taxable person making supplies to UN bodies is expected to mention the UIN on the invoice and treat such supplies as supplies to another registered person, that is B2B. What is the validity period of registration certificate issued to a casual taxable person? Period applied by him or 90 days, whichever is earlier. However, it can be further extended for a period of 90 days on the application by the person. What happens when the registration is obtained by means of willful misstatement, fraud, or suspension of facts?
The officer can so to cancel the registration.
Correct. Is there any option? I will just repeat your answer. In such cases, the registration may be cancelled with retrospective effect by the proper officer under section 29(2)(e). Is there any option to take centralized registration for services under GST law?
No.
No such registration is available. What could be the liabilities insofar as registration is confirmed on transfer of a business?
Paying of the previous liabilities or anything pending.
The transferee or the successor shall be liable to be registered with effect from such transfer or succession, and he will have to obtain a fresh registration with effect from the date of such transfer or succession. Should we stop?
Yes.
Last two questions. At the time of registration, will the assessee have to declare all his places of business?
Yes.
Of course. All the material facts he has to mention. Does cancellation of registration impose any tax obligation on the person whose registration so cancelled?
Yes, if it is, he has to file that returns and clear it.
Correct. So as per 29(5), every registered taxable person whose registration is cancelled shall pay an amount by way of debit to electronic cash ledger equivalent to the credit of ITC held in stocks of input, semi-finished and finished goods or capital goods immediately preceding the date on such cancellation of cancellation or output tax payable of such goods, whichever is higher. So all those calculated ITC or tax payable on the output of supply of those material or capital goods, whichever is higher. Okay, so we'll see other questions on next session. Thank you so much.